had this information, and did they not have a discussion about whether or not the users should be informed back in December of 2015?
Senator, in retrospect, I think we clearly view it as a mistake.
Well, Secretary Clinton, welcome back to Google.
It's great to be here, Eric. Thank you. You've grown a little bit since I've been here last. Just a little.
Are you talking about my weight? I knew I'd gain some pounds here.
The responses that we received were unfortunately evasive, and some were frankly non-responsive. So I'm going to ask the question again here. How much revenue did Facebook earn from the user engagement that resulted from foreign propaganda?
Who of you has heard of Uber or these other car services? Very efficient. Changing one of the oldest business models called taxi services.
At this point, it looks pretty much like Biden will be the next president of the United States. He'll be president of the United States for the following 4 years. And Biden is particularly aligned with a particular faction in the ruling class. I wanted to read to you something that was just in the Financial Times. They ran an article, "What can Silicon Valley expect from Joe Biden?" The president-elect has hired Jessica Hertz, former Associate General Counsel at Facebook, and Cynthia Hogan, former Apple Vice President for Government Affairs, to his transition team. Eric Schmidt, the former Google Chief Executive, has been a big fundraiser and is being talked about to lead a new technology industry task force in the White House. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris, the vice president-elect, has long been supported by the likes of Sheryl Sandberg and Salesforce's Mark Beinhoff. Her brother-in-law and former chief of staff, Tony West, is Uber's chief legal executive. A senior executive at one major technology company said, quote, "Mr. Biden has lots of friends in the industry, and it's a world he feels very comfortable with." Quite amusing. But the article goes even further. One area where Mr. Biden has been outspoken is Section 230, the part of U.S. law that shields social media companies from being sued over content posted on their sites by users. Mr. Biden is no fan, saying last year that Section 230 should be revoked immediately, for Zuckerberg and other platforms are propagating falsehoods that they know to be false. Very interesting. Very, very interesting, folks. Now, keep in mind what I've pointed out before about the fact that Silicon Valley, Twitter, Facebook, made the decision to censor the information about the Hunter Biden scandal and the laptop. Keep that in mind. But there is so much more to this story, folks. So much more to this story. But before we get fully into who Silicon Valley are and who this particular wing of the ruling class are and where they came from, thought I might want to also read you a little bit of information. For those of you who are convinced that, hey, tech censorship, they're only going to affect the so-called alt-right or white supremacists. It's not going to affect any leftists. Check this out. Google admits to censoring the world's socialist website. In a statement before a Senate hearing on October 28th, Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google's parent company, Alphabet, admitted that the dominant online search company has censored the World Socialist website. At a Senate Commerce Committee hearing, when asked by Republican Senator Mike Lee of Utah to provide the name of one left-wing, high-profile person or entity that has been censored, Pichai named the World Socialist website. They actually have the transcript. It says, "Can you name one high-profile person or entity from a liberal ideology who you have censored and what particular action you took. And the Google exec replies, we have moderation policies which we apply equally. We have compliance issues with the World Socialist Review, which is a left-leaning publication. Now, World Socialist Review, a print newsletter, has ceased publication in 2011, but it was a reference to the World Socialist website. And the article points out, in fact, a Google search for World Socialist Review actually yields the name World Socialist website in the results. Quite interesting. Now, World Socialist website, Trotskyites, I certainly wouldn't agree with them on everything, but they're very anti-imperialist. They opposed the destruction of Libya. They exposed what the Hillary Clinton State Department was doing during the Arab Spring. They were very consistently exposing what was done in Libya. Well, we now know, it is confirmed, it is in the congressional record that the Silicon Valley elite, Google Alphabet, made a point of suppressing the World Socialist website. But now, folks, here is where it starts to get interesting. Folks, I have brought with me a lot of documentation because when you start talking about this kind of thing, people suddenly start rolling their eyes and saying, this is conspiratorial, this is all made up, this is cuckoo, this is tinfoil hat. Well, some things out there, yes, are conspiratorial, yes, are tinfoil hatty, and there's a lot of literature on the internet that makes very big logical leaps, says this means this when it doesn't mean that, and comes to conclusions that are pretty outlandish. So you have to be careful with all of this. But I've got here in my hand a number of articles from mainstream publications confirming what I am about to tell you. And I've talked about it before, but just to make sure that you know that I'm not pulling this out of my, that I'm basing this on actual information. All right, this is from Quartz. This is an article. Google's true origin partly lies with CIA and NSA research grants for mass surveillance. The article goes into great detail about how there would not be a Google if there was not an NSA and a CIA. This is not tinfoil hatty. This is not Alex Jones. But there's other information. You can read this article, The Secret History of Silicon Valley. The Secret History of Silicon Valley. Right? Goes into great detail about how the intelligence agencies and the government arranged for Silicon Valley to emerge and come into existence. Again, in case you don't believe me, this is Forbes magazine. Startups backed by the CIA. Talks about all kinds of startup companies funded by the CIA. Talks about how the Washington Post reported that in 2005 it received $37 million in funding from the CIA. It tends to invest roughly $500,000 to $2 million in any given company. There was an outfit called In-Q-Tel, which basically was a CIA company that, CIA funding that would invest in startup companies on Silicon Valley, tech companies. The CIA was in the business of setting up tech companies. This is Forbes magazine. CIA set up tech companies, had a whole setup in Q-Tel to set up these kind of things. Again, if I said, hey, a number of the startup companies on Silicon Valley, a number of the tech companies were set up by the CIA, people would roll their eyes and go, oh boy, you made that up, Caleb. I bet that's true. Well, Forbes magazine confirms it. Go back as far back as 1999. This is BBC News. Business, the economy, CIA invests in Silicon Valley. All about how money from the intelligence agencies was key in setting up Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley was created by American intelligence agencies for very key reasons. They wanted to make sure that Western capitalism could dominate the global information war. Right? They wanted to make sure that alternative voices, alternative perspectives didn't get the upper hand. And in fact, they'd been talking about this for a long time. Now, I've talked to you all about Zbigniew Brzezinski. You know that name, Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was the chief Cold War strategist. He was the national security advisor to Jimmy Carter. He received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Ronald Reagan. He was Polish, moved to Canada, eventually moved to the United States. His daughter is Mika Brzezinski on Morning Joe. You ever watch Morning Joe? That's Mika's daddy, Zbigniew Brzezinski. Well, Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote a book about the Technotronic age. He wrote this book in 1970, The Technotronic Age, using technology to carry out social transformation. Folks, when we talk about Silicon Valley, that refers to California, Palo Alto, how a lot of tech firms are based in Southern California. There was an explosion of tech firms in Southern California starting in the 1980s. And in fact, we know why that is. I just showed you why that is. The NSA and the CIA made a strategic decision. You see, we've been told so many times that the computer revolution is proof of the greatness of capitalism. How many times have we been told that, right? The computer revolution proves the free market is great. Look, these Apple guys, these nerds were just tinkering around in their garages and they came up with a brand new idea. And because of this brand new idea that they came up with, they became rich and we got new technology, and that's capitalism. Well, we now know it is a matter of public record, what I just read you, that it was not the free market. The CIA is not the free market. The intelligence agencies are not the free market. There is a strategic decision made by the government, and particularly the covert operations wing of the government, the secret government, the classified wing of the government, the deep state made a decision to pour lots and lots of money into computer companies. And eventually we got DARPA, and eventually we got the internet, and eventually we got the computer revolution. So no, Silicon Valley and the computer revolution is not proof that the free market is the answer. In fact, it is the opposite. If the free market had been simply left up to its own devices, there never would have been a computer revolution. You can go way back to Alan Turing and his decoding machine. Do you think that was created by the free market? No. Alan Turing was dragged out by British intelligence during the war. Let's not forget, right? And it was a military operation. The free market did not create the computer revolution. But, and this is where it gets very, very, very interesting. The people on Silicon Valley don't realize that. And a few weeks before the election, Wall Street Journal, which leans Republican, ran this lovely article. Right? If you read this article, this is Donald Trump criticism, economic nationalist Steve Bannon criticism of Silicon Valley. This is the Trump administration, the economic nationalists, probably the Pentagon more than anything's criticism of Silicon Valley, of the people that run the tech giants. It says, the new establishment of Wall Street and the City of London and the new establishment of Silicon Valley have precious little to do with Washington or Whitehall. The public sector is for losers. As today's elite see it, the best thing that the government can do is get out of the way and let the really talented people exercise their creating magic. It goes on, it says, unlike the dead aristocrats in the churchyards, the geeks who run Google and Facebook have no sense of guilt to give them pause, and few ties of blood and soil to connect them to a particular patch of land. They believe their fortunes are the product of nothing but their own innate genius. They owe the rest of us nothing. Let me read that one more time. Unlike the dead aristocrats in the churchyards, the geeks who run Google and Facebook have no sense of guilt to give them pause, and few ties of blood and soil to connect them to a particular patch of land. They believe their fortunes are the product of nothing but their own innate genius. They owe the rest of us nothing. Who does that sound like? Right? Who said that the geniuses, the great men are the motor of the world and they owe nothing to the rest of society? Yes, these people are so libertarian and so objectivist that the Trumps and the Steve Bannons are afraid of them. They have no loyalty to the United States, no loyalty to anything. That is who, according to the Wall Street Journal, is running Silicon Valley. This is their article. Who are these people? Who are these people? Well, folks, I have many times pointed toward a very, very, very important book. You want to understand the Obama administration. You want to understand Silicon Valley. You want to understand the Democrats. You want to understand the managerial wing of the ruling class. This is the book to read. The Aquarian Conspiracy, Personal and Social Transformation in the 1980s. Marilyn Ferguson. Now, who is Marilyn Ferguson? Well, this is her Wikipedia page. Points out that she was a big influence on Ted Turner. It says also that Ferguson's work influenced Vice President Al Gore, who participated in her informal network while a senator and later met with her at the White House. I want to just read to you a little bit from this book. And this book, mind you, is not a fringe, irrelevant book. It's endorsed here by Carl Rogers, one of the most famous psychologists, who, if you Google it, also owes his career to the CIA. It's endorsed here by Arthur Kessler, one of the main anti-communist, ex-communist writers from Germany. He put out a book called The God That Failed. This book has gotten quite an endorsement. Right? At the same time that Silicon Valley is starting to set up shop, as we just went over, with CIA money, this book is published. The Aquarian Conspiracy. And it basically describes how there is a movement of personal and social transformation taking place all over the world. It's not pro-communist, it's not anti-communist, it's changing. It says there are school teachers, office workers, famous scientists, government officials, lawmakers, artists, millionaires, and taxi drivers, leaders in medicine, education, science, law, and psychology. Some are open in their advocacy and may be familiar. There are legions of conspirators. They are in corporations, universities, and hospitals, on the faculties of public schools, in factories and doctors' offices, on city councils and in the White House staff, in state legislatures, volunteer organizations, and virtually all areas of policy making. She talks about the great paradigm shift. The paradigm of the Aquarian Conspiracy sees humankind as embedded in nature. It promotes the autonomous individual in a decentralized society. Remember what I just read you about how they feel they owe no one anything? the autonomous individual in a decentralized society. Human nature is neither good nor bad, but open to continuous transformation and transcendence. Basically, it's time to unleash the chaos, unleash individuals, decentralize society. Some scary stuff here. This is particularly interesting because it seems to focus, the text seems to focus on changing individuals and how they see the world, and then involving them in a mass effort to change the world itself. Writes here, it talks about triggers. Right? How do you change an individual? It says the intentional triggers of transformative experiences are numberless, yet they have a common quality. They focus awareness on awareness, a critical shift. For all their surface variation, most focus on something too strange, complex, diffuse, or monotonous to be handled by the brain's and intellectual half. On breathing, repetitious physical movement, water, flame, a meaningless sound, a blank wall, a paradox. What in the world is she talking about? But she's talking about all these methods through which you can trigger people to change, to have their personal transformation, to join the great social transformation that she is advocating. Sensory isolation and sensory overload, because sharply altered input can cause shifts in consciousness. Sensory isolation, that's like putting someone in solitary confinement, right? That's what that is. When people are in solitary confinement, they start to lose their minds, right? Prisons all across the country, they have solitary confinement facilities. And you'll notice that people who go into solitary confinement for a long time come out psychologically damaged. They can't look you in the face, right? Their ability to speak and to communicate is damaged. What else does she talk about? Hypnosis and self-hypnosis. Seminars like EST, that's Landmark Forum, Silva Mind Control, Actualizations, Lifespring, which attempt to break the cultural trance and open the individual to new choices. The Fisher-Hoffman process, a similar re-entry into childhood anxieties, followed by an intense use of imagery reconciliation with forgiveness of one's parents for negative early childhood experiences. Right? She says all of these approaches might be called psychotechnologies, systems for a deliberate change in consciousness. She's talking about how to brainwash people. Right? She says the first stage is preliminary, almost happenstance, entry point. The entry point can be identified in retrospect. Changes in the brain chemistry triggered by psychedelics cause the familiar world to metamorphose. She starts talking about LSD and how you can begin your psychological transformation by taking LSD, by taking psychedelic drugs, by taking hallucinogens. This is in here. This is Al Gore's spiritual advisor. Right? Step 2 is for the exploration. Step 3 is integration, right? And step 4, where is step 4? Not only does the new paradigm work in his own life, but it seems to work for others. If the mind can heal and transform, why can't the minds join to heal and transform all of society? Now in the 4th stage, conspiracy, he discovers other sources of power, ways to use it for fulfillment and in service to others. All right? So she's basically describing we have to change the way people think. And there's many ways of doing it, like you can, give them sensory overload, or you can give them sensory deprivation, or you can hypnotize them, or you can, have them relive traumatic childhood experiences. And this is all psychotechnology to change the way people think. But it gets better. It gets so much better, so much better. So she's explaining this conspiracy to change the way people think. I mean, this is her words, conspiracy. I'm not calling it a conspiracy because I'm a conspiracy nut. I'm saying The name of the book is The Aquarian Conspiracy. She says, America is free, but California is freer. If America is open to innovation, innovation is California's middle name. And then she starts naming, you can't make this up, she starts naming the institutions in California that are working with her on her great project for social and personal transformation. She says, in California, the old social compartments are being broken down, and we are creating a new aristocracy, an aristocracy of those who care. Membership is restricted only by the capacity for concern. In Santa Barbara, with the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, the Center for the Advanced Study in Behavioral Sciences in Palo Alto, and the Stanford Research Institute. She names 3 CIA-linked research institutions that are working with her on this project. She goes on to describe the Club of Rome. Do folks remember the Club of Rome? The think tank that published a document called The Limits to Growth that argued there were too many people in the world and we had to desperately reduce the human population. Right? The yeast of change, the scattered myriad of spontaneous groupings of people springing up here and there like antibodies in a sick organism. Right? There's a sense of imminent world transformation. Right? She talks about the Threshold Foundation in Switzerland. This is Marilyn Ferguson, the spiritual advisor to Al Gore, who had events with him in the White House, the spiritual advisor to Ted Turner, all kinds of people. And of course, she lists as ground zero for her conspiracy, Southern California. She lists Palo Alto. She lists an institution called the Stanford Research Institute. Well, again, because you're going to say I made this up, it sounds way too wacky. It sounds way, way too wacky, right? If someone just told me this, I wouldn't believe it. Parapsychology research at the Stanford Research Institute. The Stanford Research Institute in Menlo Park, California, carried out research on various phenomena characterized as parapsychology from 1972 to 1991. Early studies indicating that phenomena, such as remote viewing and psychokinesis, could be specifically studied and were published in such mainstream journals as, and lists the journals. This attracted the sponsorships of such groups as NASA and the Central Intelligence Agency. Right? All kinds of documentation that the Stanford Research Institute, which Marilyn Ferguson lists as ground zero of this great social and personal transformation that she's leading, was conducting all kinds of research into weird psychic powers and all kinds of weird stuff. Weird stuff. It gets weirder and weirder and weirder. Now, folks, I read you her process in here. Marilyn Ferguson's process. Of social transformation. I read in here her process of personal transformation. Right? But first, the person has their triggering experience with LSD, or with hypnosis, or with social, with sensory deprivation or sensory overload, or with various planned workshops where they relive childhood trauma or whatever. Then from there, they become educated. Then from there, they become integrated into the new lifestyle. And then they join a conspiracy with other people to carry out the social transformation. Your personal transformation has 3 stages. And then in the 4th stage, you join the social transformation. Well, you all should check out this book. The Search for the Manchurian Candidate, the CIA, and Mind Control. And they describe the exact same process. They call it unfreeze, change, refreeze. And they did all kinds of experiments with LSD and with hypnosis, all kinds of stuff, right? This is who's running Silicon Valley. A group of people that essentially believe that we must transition to a decentralized world in which the individual is completely unleashed and unrestrained by society. This is insanity. It is insanity, and it is so insane that even people like the Wall Street Journal and even people in the Trump administration who are right-wing and cruel, even they think it's insane, right? It's too individualist even for these people. The Wall Street Journal is ranting against them, saying these people have no... Let me read to you again what it said. Unlike the dead aristocrats in churchyards, the geeks who run Google and Facebook have no sense of guilt to give them pause and few ties of blood and soil to a particular patch of land. They believe their fortunes are the product of nothing but their own innate genius. They owe the rest of us nothing. Let me read to you once again what Marilyn Ferguson says the goal is. The paradigm of the Aquarian conspiracy sees humankind as embedded in nature. It promotes the autonomous individual in a decentralized society. The autonomous individual in a decentralized society. Folks, this sounds like things that are completely unconnected, right? It's like, first I told you that Silicon Valley is in with Biden. That Biden and Silicon Valley are on the same page. That is blatantly obvious. Silicon Valley was pulling for Biden. Silicon Valley wanted Biden to win. Silicon Valley, at this point, is suppressing Donald Trump's tweets. Silicon Valley, at this point, has suppressed that Hunter Biden story about the Hunter Biden scandal. Silicon Valley is with Biden. And I read to you at the beginning all the connections, how, at this point, Biden has named the legal counsel of Facebook to his transition team. He's named Eric Schmidt, the founder of Google, to his transition team. That Kamala Harris, her brother-in-law, is the chief lawyer for Uber, right? I read to you all the connections. I read to you all those connections. I read them to you, right? And then I read to you about how the CIA created Silicon Valley, how there would be no Silicon Valley without the CIA. And then I read to you a crazy, crazy manifesto by a spiritual advisor to all kinds of congressmen and leading political figures, who it turns out is shilling for all kinds of weird CIA-linked think tanks that just happen to be based in Silicon Valley. And then I read to you, I showed you how the personal transformation leading to social transformation process that she describes in her book is exactly the mirror of the brainwashing process that the CIA developed with their LSD experiments and their crazy mind control research during the Cold War. Folks, I'm telling you that the Silicon Valley elite are a special breed of evil. That doesn't mean Trump is good. I'm never saying Trump is good. Trump is not good, okay? We can all agree on that. Trump is a warmongering murderer. Trump is a racist. Trump is an anti-immigrant bigot. Trump is a brutal authoritarian. He's supporting the police. No one here is trying to say that these people are worse than Trump. That's not what I'm telling you. But I want you to understand who it is who is going to rule over us for the next 4 years. Folks, I wrote a book about Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris and the Future of America. And in this book, I talk about the Hillary Clinton State Department. Right? During the Obama administration, Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State. And Hillary Clinton wanted to run for president once again in 2020. And when it was made clear that the U.S. public was not going to have Hillary Clinton run for president once again, the backers of Hillary Clinton all put their money behind this woman, behind Kamala Harris. It's well understood Kamala Harris was the new Hillary Clinton. And that faction is in with Silicon Valley and did some crazy evil things during the Obama years. Some crazy evil things during the Obama years. Unbelievable. During the Obama years, right after Barack Obama took office, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. I talk about in the book how Jared Andrew Cohen, who worked in the Hillary Clinton State Department, was a former employee of Google Alphabet. He immediately went over to Twitter and told Twitter to take some actions that would facilitate protests against the government of Iran. Did not ask the Obama administration for permission to do this, just did it. And the Obama administration found out that Jared Andrew Cohen was going to Google and going to Twitter and giving them instructions on behalf of the State Department without asking them, tried to fire Jared Andrew Cohen. But according to The New Yorker, Hillary Clinton protected Jared Andrew Cohen. Later, we found out that during the Arab Spring, Jared Andrew Cohen of Google Alphabet and of the U.S. State Department was working with Hillary Clinton and was working with Facebook and Twitter to manipulate the events of the Arab Spring, to unleash chaos throughout the Middle East. And what was the result of that? Libya, the country that had the highest life expectancy on the African continent, were being reduced to rubble. Folks, remember how there was video going through the internet of evil atrocities by evil Gaddafi, and the people of Libya were rising up against Gaddafi? And now Libya has been in shambles ever since. They've got slavery in Libya at this point, human chattel slavery. They've got two factions fighting each other for power. People are drowning in the Mediterranean trying to get out. Libya reduced to utter chaos. Millions of people have their lives destroyed if they're not dead, right? Thousands and thousands of people are dead. Millions of people in Libya have their lives destroyed because Twitter and Facebook manipulated the events and set the stage for the instability in Libya that then justified the NATO airstrikes. The folks remember what happened in Syria and how one of the only countries in that region where you have Sunni and Shia, Christians, Alawites, all living together in peace, was reduced to complete and utter chaos, a mass refugee crisis, millions of people becoming refugees, at least 500,000 people dead. Syrian civil war, again fomented with Twitter and Facebook and Al Jazeera. Do people remember this? Do people remember Honduras? Where just right after Obama took office, long before the Arab Spring, Honduras, 2009, the socialist president, Manuel Zelaya, is toppled in a military coup, dragged out of the presidential mansion in his pajamas, and the military takes over. And Barack Obama is asked about this as the new president. He says, well, that's clearly not legal. The military can't overthrow the government. Because he doesn't know that Hillary Clinton has been meeting with the coup plotters, and they've been planning this all along. Look at the refugees on the border. How many of them are coming from Honduras? Honduras has the highest murder rate in the world at this point. Narco chaos. I mean, it has been complete instability in Honduras, complete instability in Libya, complete instability in Syria, millions of lives destroyed, a refugee crisis. ISIS and Al-Qaeda set up shop in Libya and in Syria, right? ISIS emerged out of the US-backed terrorists to destabilize Syria. All of this is happening. Folks, I'm trying to spell it all out for you. It may sound like completely disconnected things, but I am reading you actual sources. I read you articles from mainstream publications showing you what is going on. That there is a faction within the American ruling class based in Silicon Valley. And they are not economic nationalists like Donald Trump by any means. They are not anti-immigrant bigots like Donald Trump by any means. They are the permanent revolution faction. These people are Trotskyites for capitalism. Right? Trotsky wanted a global permanent socialist revolution. These people want a global permanent capitalist revolution to unleash the individual. That's what they want. These people are Ayn Rand objectivists, extremists, and they want global instability so that they, as the new aristocracy, can have unrestrained power. I mean, it's insane. It is really, really insane. When I just read to you about the Aquarian conspiracy and Marilyn Ferguson, I just read to you about Silicon Valley and how they started out. I just read to you what the Wall Street Journal said about them. This is the period that we're living in. And the permanent revolution faction, the Hillary Clinton State Department faction, the Eric Schmidt faction, the Zbigniew Brzezinski faction, has taken power. These folks are on their way back to the White House. The chances of Trump, becoming president for the next 4 years are very, very small. Biden won this. And I think honestly it was a legit election. I mean there was foul play here, there was foul play there. People can point to this and that, but I am not yet convinced that it was a fraudulent vote. I'm not yet convinced that there was enough foul play to have changed the election. I think that the result of the election is the result. It's a legit result. Biden won the election. But what that means is that Silicon Valley, the Silicon Valley fascists, the folks who are carrying out Marilyn Ferguson's Aquarian conspiracy, the folks who engage in, personal transformation, they are back in the White House. That's what's going on here, folks. I'll tell you one more time. The president-elect has hired Jessica Hertz, a former associate general counsel at Facebook, and Cynthia Hogan, former Apple vice president for government affairs, to his transition team. Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, chief executive, has been talked about to lead the industry task force in the White House. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris, the vice president-elect, has long been supported by Facebook's Sheryl Sandberg and Salesforce's Mark Bainoff. Her brother-in-law, Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, and former chief of staff, Tony West, is Uber's chief legal officer. A senior executive at one major technology company said, Mr. Biden has lots of friends in the industry. Folks, the Aquarian conspiracy faction, the Silicon Valley fascists, the permanent global revolution for capitalism, the LSD social transformation, psychic research, CIA, Stanford Research Institute, Palo Alto insanity. This is who is going to be running the government. The same people who ran the Hillary Clinton State Department now have the executive branch under their control. This is what I was trying to get you to understand with the Kamala Harris book. It's a lot of complicated information. A lot of complicated information here. It's not simple. You have to kind of decode this. But basically, Silicon Valley and the global chaos, decentralized world faction, the permanent capitalist revolutionaries, have taken power. That's what's going on here. Right? Brzezinski, Zbigniew Brzezinski, his book that he wrote, The Technotronic Age, right? They planned this. Right? And that a particular faction in our ruling class that was thinking long-term and strategically, is not the short-term capitalist interests of Trump and Bernie Marcus and Betsy DeVos, but a more managerial wing of the ruling class that wants to transition to that decentralized authority with the unleashing of the individual. Those folks have taken power. That's what happened in this election. And it may be better, honestly, right? It may be better. Right? I don't know. Right? That's why I was neutral in this election. I don't know. These people are evil. Right? Read my book on Kamala Harris. These people are very, very scary, and they are very, very evil. But Donald Trump's people are very, very scary and very, very evil, as is widely known. But we need to know what we're going to be dealing with for the next 4 years. Well, now we know. Read the Aquarian conspiracy. Read the writings of Marilyn Ferguson. Read about the Stanford Research Institute. This is who is going to rule us for the next 4 years. So buckle up and enjoy the ride.
Had this information, and did they not have a discussion about whether or not the users should be informed back in December of 2015?
Senator, in retrospect, I think we clearly view it as a mistake that...
Well, Secretary Clinton, welcome back to Google.
Great to be here, Eric. Thank you. You've grown a little bit since I've been here last. Just a little.
Are you talking about my weight? I knew I'd gain some pounds here.
The responses that we received were unfortunately evasive, and some were frankly non-responsive. So I'm going to ask the question again here. How much revenue did Facebook earn from the user engagement that resulted from foreign propaganda?
Who of you has heard of Uber or these other car services? Very efficient. Changing one of the oldest business models called taxi services.